Hey everybody, this is Patrick. I'm going to be interviewing Mike today about his involvement in sport management.
Yep.
All right, can you just briefly tell me about your involvement in the industry?
Um, I got started officiating college basketball while I was still a student at UNC in 1986, I think. I had worked high school basketball games for a couple years, and then my junior year at Chapel Hill started working Division III games, and then the next year got um, advancement to um, the Big South Conference, which was Division I. So that was kind of how I got started, and then had a 12, 13-year officiating career. And during that same time period was also involved in AAU basketball before I had children and then after I had kids.
Okay. So what made you want to become a referee, and how'd you kind of get certified, and how was that process?
It's kind of by happenstance, actually. I was coaching a summer baseball as a freshman in college, and one of the kids on my team was John Clockerty's son. And John was a pretty high-level ACC, SEC referee at the time, and kind of had a friendship with him. And he suggested that if I was interested in staying involved in basketball, which I was, it would be a good avenue to do that. And I did it, and kind of liked it. I mean, I liked it. It was a way to be involved in the game, and I made some. And as a college student, made pretty good money. It took. I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. So what was the time commitment? Were you doing one game a week or multiple games? What kind of the travel? What was that like?
When you kind of get up to the college level, kind of the entry level, Division III, Division II, and low D1, I was probably working when I got to a level where I wasn't working high school anymore. It was too much to work both, and so I was working just college games, and it was probably 45 to 50 games a year, and it kind of averaged 3 days a week, 3 evenings or 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So typically like something like Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. And the travel for me was everywhere. I traveled as far as Northern Virginia all the way to Louisiana and Florida. So depending on where you were traveling, a lot of times the time commitment getting to your game was more than the actual game time itself.
Okay. And obviously you already mentioned that you liked it, or else you probably wouldn't have kept pursuing it. But what was your favorite part about being ref, and what was your least favorite part?
My favorite part was actually just the game itself, working again, teamwork with your other officials, working, doing a good job, and whether you've done a good job in a really tight game and where the kids are playing well, the coaches are on their game. It's very competitive, and you feel like you're getting the calls right. That's it's a lot of fun. I mean, I got a lot of satisfaction from that. I would say the things that I didn't like so much about it, the travel could kind of wear you down at some point. I think probably the most I don't think I ever had more than 4 or 5 games in a week. Some guys were working almost every night. I think that's too much and kind of wears you down.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I didn't really like, there's a lot of politics involved in advancement because really who is a good referee is really eye of the beholder. It's not like taking a written test where, okay, these 3 guys have scored the highest grade. It's pretty clear cut. It's very subjective as to who, and there was a lot of internal politics involved in that.
Okay. Do you have any specific memories of like certain coaches or players that you can remember, or are they kind of a blur at this point?
Yeah, I refereed a good many College of Charleston games back when a guy named John Kress, right when College of Charleston was
Mhm.
becoming kind of a. They won a couple games one year in the NCAA tournament, upset some people. They had a kid who ended up going to the NBA and having a good NBA career, Anthony Johnson.
Mhm.
And John Kress was a really, really good coach. I mean, his teams were very prepared. You could, even as a referee, I was completely, unbiased, but you can tell, um, which teams are more talented, which teams are better prepared. And John did a good job with his squad. And
Yeah.
I had stayed in touch with John even after I got out of officiating for a while.
Okay. So as a ref, I guess you're obviously employed by the NCAA. Is that true or not?
Actually, so each conference, you're an
Does
independent
that?
contractor,
Okay.
and each conference gives you a contract at the beginning of the season. There's no guarantee that you'll get games, and you can have games taken away from you if you perform poorly. So you contract with that league, with that
Okay.
conference. So I had a contract with the Big South Conference, a contract with the Colonial,
Mhm.
Transamerica, and so on, with all the leagues that I officiated.
Okay. Next question is, how do you see college athletics changing in the future? You obviously had some experience with them in the past, so how do you see them moving forward? There's a lot of politics involved now. What are your thoughts on that?
It's the money's gotten significantly larger, and I mean, my personal belief is that we've got a system that really probably works for everybody except the student athlete.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got literally $1 billion NCAA basketball tournament TV contract. Players can't. There's no freedom of movement from one institution to another. They're the only guys penalized if they went from one school to another. They have to sit out a year. If a coach leaves, he doesn't have to sit out at all. I wouldn't. I mean, I'm personally believe, and I think there's some changes. Whether this will occur, in the next couple years or a decade, but I think the definition of amateurism is probably going to change.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of unfair that, if you went to school as an engineering student, there's no prohibition on your ability to go out and earn income,
Mhm.
right? As a student, if you had some, great idea, or if you were a computer science kid and, were able to form a company like Google or Facebook or something like that,
Yeah.
there's no prohibition on that. But yet a player has no control over their likeness. I understand Title IX, but I think if you change the amateurism definition so that the kids aren't employed, they're not employees of the school, but they are free to get whatever the market will provide them in terms of compensation. That seems fair to me.
Yeah. So my next question was, do you support paying athletes? And you obviously are saying they need some sort of compensation, whether
Well,
it's
I'm
money
not.
or something else.
I think there's a fine line between the issue about the school employing the kid. I'm not in favor of that, and I
Yeah.
don't think that will ever occur for a lot of reasons. Title IX and gender equity being probably the predominant one.
Yeah.
But I think that you could, by changing the definition of amateurism, you can allow a kid who is very marketable, a player, to profit on that. And I don't have any, I think the NCAA and the schools are very concerned about that, because then they lose control over that kid's image and likeness.
Yeah.
But if, for example, I'm just using a player, if Cat Barber decided that he wanted to go and on Sundays during the season when he's not playing, or around his practice times when he's not practicing, he wants to go sign autographs for an hour and get paid. If somebody's willing to pay him to do that, I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah.
I doubt there would be the same demand for a female basketball player. So that prevents the school from being the employer of those folks.
Okay.
Hold on one second.
Would y'all like a Coke or Pepsi or tea? Mountain Dew? You want a drink?
No, I'm fine.
You sure?
Yeah, thank you.
I can get one for you on the second floor.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we talked a little bit about college athletics. Can you talk about youth sports and what you've done as far as before you had kids and after?
Yeah, so before I had kids, I used to run a summer basketball league for Nike here in the Triangle area, and I had an AAU team that I kind of organized. I ran it was kind of I was one of the first people that I know anywhere in the Southeast to do these showcase basketball camps. It was at the time called the Raleigh Roundball Classic. It started back in '88 or '89, and I would bring 80 kids, high school players in. The NCAA rules about recruiting were different then, so I would bring in 80 kids on a Saturday and divide them up, and they'd do skill development and play, and I'd have 40 or 50 college coaches there. It was efficient use of their time, and I did a lot of basketball-related stuff like that.
Okay. So for those that are not familiar with AAU basketball, can you just kind of explain what that is and how the circuit kind of works?
AAU is kind of a broad umbrella. Probably the better descriptive is grassroots basketball. There are a whole host of organizations that allow kids who are really focused on basketball a competitive structure to continue playing beyond their high school season. And most of the college players are year-round basketball players in high school by that time, even before then, actually now. And the grassroots circuit involves there's some NCAA rules now, but for example, the teams I was involved in kind of got the best kids from around the Triangle, around Eastern North Carolina, and put them together, and then played other elite teams from Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia. And
Yeah.
it gave those kids another season, essentially, 30 to 45 games between the end of their high school basketball season and kind of the end of the summer.
Yeah.
Where they could develop and continue to play.
Okay. So you mentioned that you were one of the first kind of guys that put together a grassroots camp. Can you explain like what caused the evolution of the AAU groups? Now there's like a team and 10 teams in every city, whereas back when you started there was maybe one group that would play together.
Yeah. There's no barrier to entry, right?
Yeah.
So as grassroots basketball kind of grew up or matured, lots of things happened. One, a lot of the shoe companies saw it as a way. Nike was kind of at the forefront. Adidas is into it now. Under Armour's in it. Saw it as an avenue to promote their shoes, promote their brand with people they didn't have to pay. For example, LeBron James's travel team was all Nike outfitted before when he was a high school kid.
Right.
And so there's more money in it now. It's become kind of this cottage industry.
Yeah.
And since there's no barrier to entry, any guy, there's no, as long as you don't have a criminal record, the NCAA will certify you to be a travel basketball coach for high school age kids.
Yeah.
And there's a guy here locally who kind of latched on to John Wall, and I would, from my perspective, that was an effort by that person to try to enrich themselves at the expense of his talent. There's a lot of people. There is an element, a very slimy underbelly to the whole travel basketball scene now.
Yeah. So obviously you just touched on some of the negative things, but what do you think have been the positive changes since you've started until now, just as far as the growth of the system in itself?
I think there's more opportunity to play good competition.
Yeah.
Anytime, kind of in my real life, I'm a investment person, and I think markets work. And so there's now more structure. There are more good tournaments to play. There are certainly more teams available. So um, I do think that for kids, and the same kind of holds true in travel baseball and soccer and so forth. So if a kid, a 13, 14-year-old athlete is really focused and interested in one particular sport, there's an opportunity for them to try to excel at that sport. Now, there's also, a lot of, I see a lot of parental pressure, kids who get burned out. I think you have to be, parents really need to be mindful of there's a balance. It's not a case where if 30 games are good, 60 games are better. Yeah. I think you're going to get kids who are burned out. You're going to exacerbate injury potential. There's a lot of it's a double-edged sword. Yeah. And there's good with it, but there's also it needs to be in moderation.
Okay. And then just kind of talking about the sport management industry as a whole, what do you think as far as someone trying to be a full-time employee of something sports related, what would be your advice to them?
Well, that's never been my career. I do know people who have majored in sports administration and gone on to, there are a whole host of opportunities. You can work in intercollegiate athletics, be an assistant AD, a sports information person. You kind of work your way up into sports administration and management, that route. There's certainly opportunities for marketing and with companies, big Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, people like that. Yeah. There are some interesting, I think, jobs or career paths managing facilities, being kind of the director of a civic center or a PNC arena. So, I think there are lots of ways you can kind of pursue where your interests are. I know a little bit about that. I'm probably not expert on what the best route for that is.
So hypothetical, if you could have one position in sports related industry, what do you think you would do or choose?
If I had a magic wand?
Yeah, if you just had anything.
Could I create my own job?
Yeah.
I would like to be the NCAA basketball czar.
Okay. The czar. Got it. And then just last question. After all of your experiences relating to sports, how would you sum up kind of everything into one life lesson that you can apply to other things that you've learned through, whether it was basketball or AAU, all that stuff?
I'd say I've learned a lot of different things in the different hats that I've worn in athletics. I learned a lot in refereeing about kind of decision making, being decisive, and making mistakes. How to handle making mistakes, because it's a profession where you're going to make mistakes, and you have to try to deal. The stakes are very high, and your call can cost a coach his job literally if you get it wrong. And so that when I was an official, those types of that accountability and that dealing with conflict, I think, has helped me in my professional life. As a player, obviously, you learn a lot of teamwork, how to deal with people from very diverse backgrounds. I've been involved in AAU teams that I kind of either coached or helped coach, where the kids were from all over the place in terms of their backgrounds. Black kids, white kids, rich kids, kids who had virtually nothing, kids with two parents, kids barely with one parent. And I think when one of the things that I think has been beneficial to my kids is having to. My kids, I think, have grown up fairly affluent, and they've seen and had to deal with kids who aren't from very different backgrounds, and I think that's made them more resilient, better, well-rounded, more kind of introspective. They're not going to be as judgmental about somebody who's different than they are, and I think that's a real important trait to take with you through life. So I mean, there's all kinds of things that you learn. Kind of self-sacrifice. You have to sacrifice your role for the better of the team. Leadership, organization. Kind of putting together a budget and logistics and planning. There's all kinds of things.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It went dark about 5 minutes ago. I mean, I'm assuming it kept going.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.